Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Being here tonight. Roll call, please. You're here enough.
A special session has been held on Thursday, February 22nd, 2018 at 5 o'clock p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a National Incident Management System training. Immediately following will be a presentation on a Northeast Master Plan. Roll call. Burrows, Townsend,
here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia. Johnson.
Here.
Kane. Here. Markley. Here. Walters. Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Albee.
Here. Tonight we'll hear about the National Incident Management System training. I'll turn this over to Administrator Bach.
Thank you, Mayor, Commission. Tonight's session, and Matt will probably go through this in a minute, but it's a one of two-part session, and this is training that the commissioners need to go through from an emergency management perspective. We opted to do it during special session. We thought if we had all of you at once, you could go through it at the same time rather than doing multiple different classes. So this is one special session. For those that missed, we'll have to have homework for, so you can feel good about
Remedial training,
because those that didn't come will get to have their own special sessions at different times scheduled for them during the day or some other time when we can get them all together. So you can feel good about it from that perspective. But it's important from that perspective. We broke it into a couple different, because it's a couple of hours of coursework that goes through it from this perspective, and this is session one. And then after that, we'll have a different update. But with that, I'm going to turn this over to our Emergency Management Director, Matt May.
Thank you, Mr. Bach. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners and other UG staff. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to do this. I was talking with Commissioner Markley beforehand and said what I'm really trying to do before we're done tonight is to make it so that when the day happens, and it will, when we all convene downstairs and we start asking you guys to make decisions, we want you to know what those expectations are, and that's where I think this hour is going to help us. I am going to make every best effort to get through all of this material if we can today. If not, we've got that second session to go through for questions, so we've got some buffer time. This is traditionally a 2-hour class. I think I can move through it smartly. There's some stuff that I think we can focus on, and some portions of this, because this is a FEMA class, that we can probably slide past. If you have questions, please, my presentation is very informal. Happy to stop and dig into something if we think we're going past something you have an interest in. So I'm going to click through a couple things here. Let me see if we have clicker command. We will power that up. Okay, real quick, the objectives are going to be a quick overview of what we call ICS, or the Incident Command System, and where the executive and senior leadership falls in that. We're going to talk about the major responsibilities that you have in that role, and get you familiar with some of the terminology, so none of that will be a surprise when that day happens. And then how that works in the field, because ICS is primarily intended for field use, but also how that integrates with the EOC, which is where we will all be when this happens. So we'll scroll past that one. And that's where you'll hear terms like EOC, Emergency Operations Center, multi-agency coordination system, and things like that. There is some terminology changes coming that just got released in October. This slide deck has not been updated for that yet, but I'll hit on those real quick. It's mostly, again, terminology issues. So like a MAC, it now has one defined meaning. It used to mean a couple of things, whether it was agency to agency interaction or agency to jurisdiction, and we were also using it to mean cross-jurisdictional integration. That terminology is going to get a new name, that second piece, the cross-jurisdictional. So it's really, when we say MAC now, we mean interagency within a jurisdiction. So what is ICS? What is the Incident Command System? well, first off, what's an incident? This is any occurrence, I don't read from the slide very often, but I will on this one. An occurrence caused by either human or natural phenomena that requires response actions to minimize or prevent loss of life, damage to property, or the environment. That's kind of a textbook definition. It's really can be a lot of things. A simple traffic accident on the street can be an incident, all the way up to a full-scale, large event that we know and fear. So a couple things about that. Things often we ask about incident timeframes. You know, if it's in the response phase, and we talk about 4 phases of emergency management: response, recovery, mitigation, and preparation. If it's in the response phase, that could be days to weeks. The recovery phase, however, literally can be years. Joplin is now in its 6th year of their recovery phase from their tornado. It can go on a long time. It takes a long time to get folks back to the condition that they were in pre-disaster, and that's always our goal and objective. How long should we be self-sufficient? The common wordage is 72 hours. I would tell you I would extend that to a week, realistically. The cavalry's not going to be there in that first 24, 48 hours. And I always stress that with the public when I do public presentations, is you need to be prepared to do that. How do you know when the incident's over? That too can vary a lot. Literally, something can come up subsequent to the actual incident that is relevant to the incident that requires a response to it, and it can be a year later. For example, some of the health issues that came out of the World Trade Center building, those weren't really discovered until a year or 2 later after the incident, but required an immediate response to prevent any further injury to the responders and other people who were involved in it. All right, so to get to that, what is ICS? The Incident Command System is basically some standardized structure that we use to manage an incident on scene. Remember I said there's a piece that's on scene and a piece that's in the EOC. This came out of a project in California where they had multiple fire departments working together to fight wildland fires, and they weren't working well with each other because they had different terms, different processes. Even what you call a fire truck, depends on what that truck does, was varied from department to department. Some of this has been standardized now, and it makes it a lot easier when I say we're going to have 3 quints on scene. Everybody knows pretty much what that means, and that's helpful from the scene responder's point of view. Let's see. So a couple things ICS is scalable. Incident command actually starts for the very first responder on the scene, and that could literally be a citizen. It doesn't have to be the traditional guys with lights and sirens. And so that person is the incident commander. What makes them the incident commander is they know more than everybody else about what's going on because they were first. The response agency might send higher ranking people to the scene. They can choose to replace that person as incident commander, or they can choose not to. It depends on what the situation is and whether there's value in doing that. So it's really a judgment call then, but it doesn't always, the incident commander isn't always the highest ranking fire, police, whoever it is on the scene at any given moment. Sometimes it's best if you let them work the problem, the person who's been there the longest. Let's see. Some of the challenges that ICS attempts to address is the chain of command. My department rolls up, another department rolls up, another jurisdiction comes to help. Who's in charge of all of that? This will help to address that. And in those scenes, in those situations, there's an org chart, which we'll see later. Those scenes may have different terminology. So we have branch chiefs in that org structure. The person who might be filling that role may or may not be a chief, maybe somebody else, a commander or some other rank name. So they have to think that that's a position name, not so much their own individual rank. Some of the things that have happened in the past that ICS tries to address is that poor communication. So there's a very distinct structure of who answers to who, and a very, what they call a unified chain of command. So that there's very clear structure of I answer to the next guy up, next guy up, next guy up. And we all understand that when we roll onto the scene together. And again, that doesn't matter if you're coming from KCK or Edwardsville or KCMO or Overland Park. You know, wherever you're coming from around here, we're all pretty much using ICS that way. And that really helps with that. It also helps with some of the planning and management of an incident. We're doing that in a very standardized way as well. And that is typically more of an EOC function, but we're trying to emulate ICS in some ways in the EOC. First and foremost, the objectives of ICS is always to, life safety is always the first priority, help achieve those tactical objectives that we agree to, and an efficient use of resources. Inevitably, we will be in a situation either by time or by just sheer volume where we don't have the resources we need. How do we use them best and most effectively in the best places? I will skip quickly over the legal basis. Just know that that's Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5 and Preparedness Presidential Directive 8 that created these two documents, the National Response Framework and the National Incident Management System, and that's where ICS comes from. One of the things that's important about the National Response Framework is out of that came some terminology that you will hear it a lot, and that's called an Emergency Support Function, ESFs, and that is how we're structured here. That is how our plan is structured. And so there are typically in a standard format 15 of them, but it is flexible. If we determined we needed to develop another ECS when I was in Florida, we actually developed one specifically for rumor control. It was such a big issue that they said, we're going to create ESF 17 and make it be rumor control. They had already had an ESF 16 for animal disposal. This particular incident required, there was literally millions of dead animals as a result of a flooding incident that was actually started in Georgia. And all of that literally came downstream. And it became such a challenge, they created a whole incident annex for it. So that's the structure. It is flexible. It is scalable. We can bring it up or down as we need to. But we are based on the 15 standard ones. I won't get into that here, but just know that that's where it comes from, is the NRF. Local government is always going to be in charge and remain in charge. Everybody above that, state and even the federal government, are support elements to us. One of the things that came out of the incidents post-Katrina was that there was discussion between the state and the local at the city level. That's a challenge, and we have to be sure that we all understand how that works, but also that the federal government doesn't just show up. We have to ask for it, and we have to give them specific objectives we're going to ask them to meet. Mr. Minor.
Does that mean, I mean, if we had an incident here that was at our federal courthouse, would that still be true?
It is, because they're going to ask us to manage that event for them. They don't have resources here to do that. And so we're going to work together, though. We're going to create an incident, probably what we call unified command. They're going to have some command responsibilities. We're going to have some command responsibilities. But together, we're going to agree on some common objectives for the response. And then the people involved or tasked with it are going to develop their tactics that they're going to use to accomplish those objectives. And you folks will have a role in that. I'll talk about that in a minute. And that's all driven by the needs of the individuals, the private sector in general, and even some NGOs. They will all be involved in that process. So we have to appreciate that they all have a role in this. So again, gives a consistent template. Just for example, if somebody says to me, you're going to go help and support ESF1, pretty much ESF1 is the same no matter where you go. And if somebody said that to me and said, can you come to Louisiana to help a Katrina type event, and they said you're going to do ESF1, I know I'm going to be doing transportation. They may not set it up exactly the same, but pretty much I got a good idea what we're doing. Who is it? It's federal, state, locals, tribals, everybody involved. And again, we're doing that preparation for, respond to, recover from, and mitigate from the effects of an incident, regardless of the size or the complexity. It scales up or down. And why do we want to do that? To meet those common objectives, to eliminate loss of life, restore property, and avoid harm to the environment in the process. Again, doctrine, flexible framework of doctrine, concepts, principles, terminology, and organizational processes. What it's not is it's not a dictate for how we're going to do tactics. It doesn't tell us that, and we don't want it to, because every incident usually requires something slightly different. It's not a resource allocation plan. That is a separate piece of what we are going to do, but there's a structure for how we're going to do it within NIMS. And then, again, designed to address international events. Those are really outside the scope of NIMS, although you can simulate some of that structure. This is really how to respond locally. The components are there. The ones we're going to focus on are that command and management piece, incident command system, the MACs, as we talked about, multi-agency coordinations, and public information. Key piece in any response is making sure the public stays informed and that we're sending consistent messages. There's tons of social science out there about how people respond to disasters and how making sure that we have a good message that has specific action steps in it and specifically is common. In other words, one department's not saying one thing, another department says another. Common thought was, well, people will panic. People don't panic, they just don't do anything. We found that out time and time again, and that inaction can cause all those issues we're trying to avoid, loss of life, et cetera. Institutionalizing NIMS, many moons ago, I think it was 83, Wyandotte County adopted NIMS as a structure, and I have the resolution in my hand if somebody would like to see it. But just know that we do have it on the books, and we're committed to it, and we continue to train on what that looks like for the responders, and also utilize it within the EOC. Like I said, it's not a strict requirement in the EOC, but it's familiar with most of the folks who are going to come in there, so we try to utilize NIMS there as well. ICS also does a couple of special things and special incidents. Hazardous Materials is one. There's some NIMS structure that's required for SARA events that impact, and we have a lot of, unfortunately, we have a lot of opportunity for that here in Wyandotte with the numerous hazardous materials that are stored, kept, and transported through here. And also OSHA has some things in there. Again, I'm not going to dig deep into that, but just know that they have a finger in this. Gosh, just about every event you can imagine, you could probably apply NIMS to, especially if it starts at the local level. So I'll let you look through that list. And it does apply to special events, what we call events of national security or significance. We certainly have opportunities for that with our large sporting venues, Speedway, Sporting KC, all those places have significant events in them, things that become targets just by their very scale. And we work closely with the folks who manage those to make sure that we're engaged with that. In fact, we're going to do an exercise out at the Speedway the last week of March that we will heavily engage the Speedway staff as well as the responders in. And that's going to be a 3-day event the last week of March. And we are going to practice that process of how do we integrate with the Speedway and their concerns and our concerns in the response. Again, scalable for size, allows personnel from all sorts of different agencies. We cannot do this ourselves. Nobody has this kind of capability. We rely on our partners, whether they're partners in the same discipline or partners across disciplines, to help us to take on their responsibilities and their pieces, and that's part of what's in the new CEOP, is exactly how that's divvied out and what our expectations are of each other. And so we look at that document to guide us, but it could be private industry, it can be those NGOs we talked about, and even down to local individuals who want to volunteer their time. Okay, ICS organization. I talked about an org chart. Again, I will try to flip through this quickly. There's a couple of things that are really key. Common terminology is huge. For the longest time, we've probably all heard about what we call 10 codes, right? Law enforcement's notorious for this. They like using 10.4, 10.9, 10.7. The problem with that is those codes aren't consistent. So if Leavenworth sends somebody down here to help us, their 10 codes don't match our 10 codes. And in fact, they use a set that's more military-based because that's where most of their law enforcement people come from. They come off the base. So that's not a good way to do business. And we're trying very hard to get the response community to merge towards what we call very simply plain English. If you have a suspect in custody, say suspect in custody. There's very few times when that code word, yeah, well, it's amazing when it happens. Yeah, you would think. It's really hard though, because it's a culture. And law enforcement has a challenge with that. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I just mean it's just so embedded in what they do that they have a hard time getting away from it. And fire's done a little bit better job with that. There are other people, the health department has codes and abbreviations and acronyms that they use that just say it out loud in English. It'll help us all understand better. So it's a concept that we're still working on. Chain of command, remember I said we have this thing called unity of command. It's just very helpful for even the people being commanded and the people who are up in the command staff to understand that chain of command. And one of the first things we do in the EOC is to start to take that org chart and block it out. It's boxes and sticks, nothing more complicated than that. Just so we understand who's doing what parts and what pieces out in the field, and then we bring that same structure into the EOC. There is identified a key person, and that is called the incident commander. Remember I said that could be a single person out in the field. It could be the first law enforcement or fire person on the scene. It could be as a citizen, but they know more than everybody else because they were there first. And that's the incident commander. Now, they can easily get relieved. There's a process for that. The biggest and most important thing in that process is that you let all involved know. So typically, for our response community, it's done on the radio, so that everybody can hear that and say, you know, Chief so-and-so has relieved Captain so-and-so of command of the incident. And that's all it takes. It documents it because it's recorded on the radio system, and everybody who's involved should be hearing it. So that's very helpful to do that. Again, the most qualified person at the scene is designated the incident commander, not necessarily the one with the most bugles or the most stars. And that's really a good process if it's being implemented that way. What's that IC's role? They provide that overall leadership. Initially, that IC, especially if it's a single person IC, they get to wear all the hats, and we have several hats we'll dig into. They can delegate authority to others, ensures incident safety. That's one of their responsibilities. They have the public information piece under them, and they have to be responsible for, at the very least, signing off on, but even initially creating the initial incident action plan. Role for seniors and executives. Really the two big things is provide policy guidance and help define objectives and help with the resource management where we're short. That's the role of you folks as commissioners and mayor. We're going to expect you to come down and sit down in the room, and we're going to bring you information that's collected in the EOC and say, here's where we need guidance. Can we do this? We think this is a good solution, but we need to make sure we can do it. Whether it's fiscal, in other words, do we want to spend the money to do that? It's always a question. Or is it even just a policy issue? And so we look for that. And then the other one, again, is that resource management piece. Can we go get more stuff? We have more stuff, we can get people back in their homes faster. Is that a good decision to make? That's one that I'm going to have my EOC come together and bring you suggestions and thoughts, but we're going to ask you guys to make that decision. And that's what we're really looking for. Questions about that? Okay. When it happens, yes. And we'll be happy to try and give guidance, but I don't want it to be the first time that you've heard that that's the expectation.
I do have a question. Does the flow chart talk about how we operate in the case of a metropolitan emergency agency or municipality to municipality in terms of who takes the lead and who is subordinate in those kind of situations?
It does, and I can speak in generalities to it. There's not only do we do planning at the local level and at the county level, but we also do it on a regional level here, and it's very good, and it's set up the same way. It's broken up in those same ESFs. And so I can show you what we call the regional coordination guide. Some are more extensive than others depending on which of the ESFs we're talking about, but in general they say this: it's still your event if you're the local agency, or what I call the agency of origin. Where did the event start at? And they become the guiding factor. It's still your, now we're here to help, we're support if we come in to go help somebody else, but it's still that agency or jurisdiction's event. Does that help? Okay. All right, command and coordination. I'm not going to dig too much into this. Real quick, active directing, ordering, controlling is command by explicit statutory, regulatory, or delegated authority. Coordination is where we are working together. Again, this typically happens when we have multiple agencies working together within a jurisdiction, or we have multiple jurisdictions working together to solve a problem. And that's where it becomes more of a unified command is the terminology we use. So nobody's in the lead. That group usually picks a spokesman, but it's a collective decision-making process.
See, if I would have just waited one more second, I could have got the question answered.
But I appreciate the lead in. Let me see. Okay, where are we? Okay, so seniors and executives are oftentimes or sometimes asked to delegate that authority. And I'm going to start the example now, and we'll talk more about it as we get towards the end. Am I doing on time? That is a process where we may be calling in support to help us manage the incident. In the state of Kansas, we call those incident management teams, or IMTs. We've recently changed that structure. We used to use those groups both in the field and in the EOC. We are now separating those two so that it could be the same people, but we're giving them two different naming nomenclatures. We're gonna have an EOC support team and an incident support team. And those folks, one of the first things they're gonna do is ask for a delegation of authority. And what they're really asking for is, can I make decisions as you would expect of maybe me to make decisions, even though they come from Shawnee County, for example. And usually there are limitations on that. We say this is how much we're gonna go, but we don't want you to have to wait until 8 o'clock the next morning to make a decision that if you made it now, we can make a significant difference in how that works. And so we want to give them some guidance, but we also want to give them some ability to make those decisions. And so that's one of those things, that delegation of authority is important. And that gives that incident commander on the scene some authority to make some decisions as well. Again, there's pieces of it here. There's an example. I think everybody should have a packet that looks like this. It has the front cover on it. At the very back of this packet, you'll see a template for that delegation of authority. This is very much just a starting point. If we were to do this, we would probably sit to get down together and write it and talk about potential scenarios based on the incident and what we are comfortable sharing as far as authority and how we want them to process that. Do they want to run it past me? Do they want to run it past Administrator Bach? Do they need to run it all the way up to the mayor? We can lay all that out, and that can be written into that delegation. So that one looks really simple, and it is. Some of them can be fairly complex. And so the IMTs come with their own delegation of authority document that they like, and so we'll look at that too. That's where we'll probably ask for your legal team to review that too as well. Okay, again, commander's role is to manage the incident at the scene and keep the EOC informed. Leadership's role is to, again, define policy or set policy, define the mission, and offer strategic direction, and again, hand out that authority. Here's where we get back into the org chart. So beneath the incident commander, we have some command staff. It's a public information officer is a key person. That person pretty much stays right at the IC's hip, because getting that information correctly and accurately out as needed, sometimes that's a need for the incident, and sometimes it's a need for the public. That PIO position is going to be doing both. We have a liaison officer, so anybody who is outside of our org chart who comes in to be a support, we're going to assign them that liaison person to work into the structure with. So it's kind of a catch-all place where we can plug people in. And then that safety officer. That in the field, that's a very obvious need, right? Let's not do anything that's going to get ourselves hurt. But even in the EOC, having a safety officer who looks at the big picture, particularly if it's things like high heat day, right? How long can we leave those crews out there? Do we need to pull them back more often than we would otherwise? If it's a biological event, what are the risks if they run into an X or Y or a Z, and what should they do to react to it? Those are things a safety officer can help do. Beneath that, we are broken into 4 columns, and I refer to this as the FLOP. That's the mnemonic that helps me remember it. So it's an operations section, which is, I call those folks the doers. They're out doing stuff. They're putting wet stuff on hot stuff. They're making rests. They're doing whatever they need to do. The planning section is the group that does that look ahead. We are going to need help. In 72 hours, we're going to run out of crews. We're going to burn them out. We need to start planning for that now. And they're going to be doing that, and they're going to be collecting that information and bringing it back to you so that you can make good decisions. And the planning department is the key linchpin in collecting and consolidating and frameworking that information. Logistics, they're the getters. We need an X, we need a Y, we need a place to bed down 50 crews that came from out of state. That's their job. They also have responsibility for the technical side of communications. Do we have enough radios? Do we need to get more? Do we need to have phones or IT support? Those kinds of folks fall in logistics. And then planning and finance, you guys pretty well figured that one out by the title. How do we pay for it now that we've all decided we're going to do it? And then how do we manage it? How do we track stuff? So if we buy 50 generators, we're probably going to want to get them back. How are we going to, we start thinking about what we call demobilization the minute we start to mobilize an asset. And so they're responsible for that. They are also responsible, again, for collecting the sit reps and the detailed information from the field. Questions about that structure? Here's a little bit more. Again, that group makes up the management team, and we call that the command staff and general staff. The command staff in the white and the general staff in the dark. I'll let you look over that. I kind of went over that already. Again, top-down, modular fashion. Can you break this out and have 3 finance sections? Yeah, if you need to. I mean, if you want to break it out that way, you can. This allows for that flexibility. But generally, we at least start in those 4 pillars. Again, the incident's going to dictate how big this is going to scale up to. If you're the only guy on the scene, you're that single IC who's standing on the edge of the curb, you're going to wear all 4 of those hats. You're going to be the getter, the doer, the planner, everything. And you may not even realize you're doing those steps, but you are.
So every one of these boxes, is that what you're saying, has a boss, even if they're only bossing themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep, that's that unity of command thing.
Thank you for making it simple for me.
Yep, nope, and it stops at the incident commander, but even that incident commander answers to this body. And they're given their authority by this body, and so they have to come back to that. And in my work chart, my EOC, you'll find that I have one more box above that, and that's the community. And I always feel like they ultimately are the ones who are going to tell us how we're going to proceed. And that's really leads us into that recovery piece, because they really get a voice there. Let's see, so here's some of the typical structure. Operations section, I'm not going to get into the terminology, there's a whole list of that, but all that terminology you see down below, that's all very standardized. When I say strike team, that means something to somebody. Just as an example, what that means is it's a group of different disciplines put together. So it might have 2 EMS people, it might have 2 law enforcement people, and it might have 4 fire teams to do search and rescue. You may need all of those elements. That becomes a strike team as opposed to a group or task force. Task force is a big group of the same kind of capability. So these terminologies all mean something. Won't dig into that one, that's a scenario run out. But you can see how a small incident, single car accident, can scale up. It could be as small as a couple of boxes, or it could be as big as all that thing you see on the far upper right there. It gets more complex, we have more boxes and sticks. Caught up with you all. All right. So the question here is what things can affect the complexity of an event? You want to see a complex event? Put 70,000 people out at the Speedway and have something happen. That's the scenario we're going to play out in March. It could be as simple, like I said, as a simple police officer making a traffic stop that escalates up from there.
But this also, I would assume, is covering that question of, I think an emergency in a more impoverished area probably has different needs than certain types of emergencies in a wealthier area because they have the resources to deal with it individually. Where in an area where they don't have any extra money or extra food or extra anything, you're facing a different set of challenges than you are in a neighborhood where there are all of those extras already in place.
Absolutely, and that actually will scale right back up to this group because that comes to that objective setting process. We're going to say, hey, because of where it is, this has got to be something we have to focus on. Or maybe it's an area where because of a lack of mobility, right, folks don't have cars because they just don't have them. And that was a problem in the 9th Ward down in Katrina, was you could say evacuate, but that doesn't mean anybody who's on, they're on foot. So that doesn't help. And so you have to address each differently.
Yeah, what made me think of that is during the hurricanes, the people that live in the beautiful condos along the coast, they have a whole lot of money. So when the hurricane's coming, they just go move into a hotel further inland, right, and they stay there until it's all over. But for somebody that doesn't happen to have $300 a night to find a fancy hotel when the prices are spiked because there's this incident, it's a whole different ballgame.
And that even could be spread out and thought to any ADA requirements. People who have limited sight or vision or hearing or any number of other mobility issues. Those all have to be addressed. And we've got that written into our plan in some generalities. But again, it's very incident specific. So we'll look at the incident and say, how do we do this differently? It becomes a big issue for our public information. Make sure that all those folks have a way of getting that good information. So lots of things can impact the complexity of an event, absolutely. Again, it's management by objectives. Those are communicated through the ICS, through that planning process, or what I talked about earlier, an incident action plan. When we write that up, that plan gets distributed to everybody who's involved in the incident if they so need a copy. Usually it doesn't trickle all the way down to the last guy on the street, but their command staff certainly knows what those objectives are. They know who's out there, and it can be a very complex document. In Greensburg, I think after the first week they were there, that document got to about 400 pages. It can be quite lengthy, but a good incident action plan can be as simple as a single page. Just got to make sure it has the right stuff in it. Again, priorities are always life safety, incident stabilization, and property and environmental conservation. We're always going to be looking out for those three elements. Those are kind of the standing items that are going to be on your objectives list, but every incident is going to add to that, depending on what the incident is and how it impacts our lives. There's that incident action plan. Again, it can be done oral. You can just say, this is what we're going to do, guys, and everybody goes forth and does good. I'd prefer to see those documents, even if you write it up after the fact. It's good to have that documentation. And again, there are some legal and policy considerations and all that. Resource management, big piece. We will never have all the stuff we need. That's exactly when you know that you're in an incident as opposed to an event. It's because you're starting to, hey, I can't handle it with what I have. Even if we pick on the recent Overland Park fires last year that were down south in 40-mile-an-hour winds, structure sets fire, they now have literally 100 individual incidents happening. They had 65 apparatus on scene. They maxed out their radio system, which they'd never done before. All sorts of challenges presented themselves that they're not used to. We were there, probably 10 or 12 other departments were there. How do you organize them? ICS. And that part went really well. But they're resources, and you can bring them on, and you need to know when to let them go, and you need to make sure that when they do go, that they go out properly, that you've gotten them squared away, whether it's making sure they've demobbed their equipment, that you've gotten back the things that they've got from you, or more importantly is that they have everything that they came in with, those kinds of things. Dispatching resources, tracking resources, recovering resources, those are all considerations that mostly planning is going to look at, but then that's going to trickle over into operations. Okay, common communications plan. If I get on that soapbox, we will be here till midnight. That's a step that we do in our heads, and internally there are documentation for this, and the dispatchers initiate it, but pretty much everybody knows what we're doing. The minute we have somebody come across the line, that's when things change, and we need to start to push out that information so they know where we are. We have so many more options than we had 5 or 10 years ago for how we communicate with each other. Just look at the IT pieces of it and so forth. We need to make sure that we all understand where's the information at and how do I get it. And we have one of the most interoperable radio systems probably in the country. And we spend a lot of time and effort and energy to get to that. And I think at the end of the day, it helps our response a lot. I won't get too into these. I'm sure you folks are all familiar with some of the challenges. Radios are an issue. We've solved that here for the most part. We have one of the most integrated radio systems. There are 2 cities left in the MARC region that are not on the system, and they are both in the works. One is Lee Summit, and the other one is Excelsior Springs, Missouri. And everybody else now is on that integrated system. You can literally pick up a handheld radio at KCI and stay on the same channel all the way to Harrison and never lose track of what you're doing, whether that's a pursuit or whether it's ordering resources or whatever. We've got a great system for that. Pentagon, they had an integrated system. They had 50 different agencies there. They are that capital area region is another one that has an extremely robust system. And we borrow good practices from each other all the time. I talk to the capital area guys quite frequently about what they're doing, because they come up with new issues all the time and we don't want to have them. So, again, any incident has to be assessed and plan the response, manage the resources, and that need or request for resources really has to be generated from the field. That doesn't mean we can't say, do you still need, and do you need more, or can we do another solution? Sometimes you may not have everything they want. So we always ask them for options. We'll talk about if we have to scale the event up into a unified and area command. I already kind of touched on some of these concepts. So I will flip past these fairly quickly. Unified command could be multi-agency within a jurisdiction, or it could be multi-jurisdictional, either one. That information all flows down to that operations section chief and then gets distributed out to the people, the boots on the ground, so to speak, who are getting the work done. And lots of times the objectives will come up from them. Hey, we need to be doing this out here. We see a need. We see a population that isn't being addressed. I've seen that happen. Guy out on the street will call up and say, hey, will you let command staff know that we have an issue out here? And then we work that into the objectives and it works back down. Football teams coming back from a state tournament is the example. Their bus is involved in an accident on the bridge that marks the county line. These are always fun. Most of the bus lands in Franklin County, but a small part of the bus is in the other county. Who's in charge? Well, let's have fun. That's when unified command is really a great idea. You divvy that up, say you guys take your half, we'll take our half, we'll make sure we're working together to get everything covered. And you know what, that happens so organically out in the field that they don't even think of it as doing ICS. That's what they're doing. Because they do it. They just talk, they stand there in the street and say, we're doing this, you do that, we're good. Area command, that's where you have multiple incidents and now you're going to bring together multiple jurisdictions. Again, if we have a large scale, maybe the 2002 ice storm is a good example of that. Everybody was touched by that here in the metro. And I was living in Baldwin and I was helping do response to that there. So we need to share that information with each other. I think we do it better now than what we did in 2002. And so at that point, you may want to formalize an area command and have that same structure like unified command, only now it's a much bigger overarching piece. So you may hear that terminology. Again, I won't belabor all the single points here, but again, it's about, again, policy, decision-making, objectives, and resources. Same concerns that we're going to have here locally, it just scales up. Other terms, we talked about area command, we talked about incident command, we talked about EOC. Again, that people tend to think of an EOC as a physical location, and that's often a good thing. But I'll tell you what, you can run an EOC out of the back of a pickup truck. And most of the counties in our state, that's exactly how they work it. They really don't have a former brick and mortar EOC like we are so lucky to have. They literally work it out of the backs of their pickup trucks. And that's okay, it still serves the same purpose. It's a point of collection of information, and sometimes the leadership stands around the back of the pickup truck and makes decisions. That's okay. Coordination and incident management assessment. Again, if you have multi-agencies coming in, somebody's got to help make those decisions. The jurisdiction of origin is the terminology that we are using here in the metro a lot now, and they're going to set those policy decisions, but they're going to do it and potentially hand that off to other jurisdictions who are going to help. Again, it's not a place. The EOC is not a place, it's a process. And so that emergency operations center can be anywhere. It can be a multitude of different elements, dispatch, on-scene commanders, a resource center. That can include the PIOs. We have a term for that that's called a Joint Information Center, or a JIC. Typically you want them close by, but not too close by, because they make a lot of noise. They watch lots of TV and they're always talking to each other, but that's what we want them to do. And they come up with great product if they put their heads together. So that's where that multi-agency coordination system comes on. Again, we're now calling that a MAC. If it's interagency but within your jurisdiction, we're going to have a new terminology. We haven't seen it yet for what it is when it's multiple jurisdictions. But we do that a lot, so we're really anxious to see that. Again, there's my information about PIOs and JICs. That joint information system will feed information to you folks to help make the best decisions you can make. That's part of my responsibility, is to make sure you're getting the best information possible. Does it change every 5 minutes? Absolutely it does. But we'll do the best we can to get it to you in a timely fashion. Again, this is us, this is an example. Multiple counties, state line, rivers, physical obstacles, political obstacles, they're all there. And I think we do a pretty doggone good job of working past those. Again, those incident management assessments, it really takes a group of people whose responsibility is to think that big picture. It tends to be our planning folks, but not always. But it might involve you folks too, to sit back and say, big picture, what do we want to get accomplished? And so maybe you're not thinking about what are we doing in the next 24 hours. Maybe you're looking down the road 72 hours or 2 weeks. Where do we want to be 2 weeks from now? We also like to do a lot of debriefing, or what we call after action reports. What could we have done better? There's no harm in finding out that we didn't do things the best way possible. we want to do better the next time. And that's when we take that information and put it into our plans. And how do we get better prepared? Just what we did last year. We rewrite our plan every 5 years. We do that to keep it in shape, get it caught up. We did a lot of changes in the plan this time. And have we addressed all the possible hazards? I can tell you what the top 10 list is off my head, top of my head. It might surprise you to find out that tornadoes are not number 1. They're actually number 6 on our list. We look at them as not only how much we can, how much impact they have, but also how much can we do about it. I mean, there's some stuff we're just going to have no control over. We'll respond to it, but there's very little mitigation and not even some preparedness that we'd like to do. But there's other things where we can do a great deal. Flood is actually one of our number 1s. Ice storm is our number 1. Those scare me a lot because there's just not much you can do about them. And they can be days and weeks, as we all well know. So when we have days like we've had the last 48 hours, get a little nervous about that. Establishing that resource management system, that's usually something that's done, oh, just get it. Don't worry about how we're doing it, just get it. And that's an okay mindset in that first 24 hours, but we have to rein that in at some point, and we have to typically backtrack into that first 24 hours. How many people do we have in the field? Probably hour 23, you probably don't know that very well. They asked for help and they got it, and we don't even know they're there. So we in the EOC try to collect that information and make sure you have it, so you know what resources we are using and how many more resources we might need. Again, financial, demobilization, managing volunteers, that's a big piece. Because again, I don't ever expect that we have enough people to do what we need to do, even in the EOC physically. I have volunteers who are set up to come in and help us. Protocols and procedures for getting out the warnings. Communications is a big piece, like I said. How we do that, we have some great tools to do that with, but we still have to focus on that and make sure that we're doing it right. Credentialing and exercising, we have a great statewide system for doing credentialing. The difference between a credential and a badge, I tend to think of them, I don't know where I set mine, it must be downstairs. No, it's in my pocket. That we use a statewide system that you can literally scan it with an app, and it will tell you that person's qualified to be an X, a Y, a Z, whether it's inside the ICS structure, they've had the training for that, or even to perform medical treatment, right? Are they an EMT, are they a paramedic? You can embed all that in that card. And so as a command person, if everybody scans in, somebody can sit at that laptop and say, okay, how many hazmat people do I have? Because I now have a hazmat issue I didn't know I had before. I don't have time to go get them. They've got to be somebody I can pull from the field. And that information flow is there. That's the value in doing that. Training, that's a never-ending challenge. I was speaking just last week, or earlier this week, with the major at the police department who's over training, Pam Wyandotte, and she and I have come up with some things that we want to train on. Communications being one, ICS being another one. We're going to try and make sure everybody's up to speed on this stuff. And then, most important, we need you folks to be that leadership. We need you to help us make sure we're going in the right direction and to get us the resources we need to make that happen. And so sometimes it's about having the right connections. Everybody brings a Rolodex in their head with them that sometimes we just go, does anybody help us with this? I need a warehouse to put, everybody know that Budweiser will can water? They call it Bud White when they do it. I can tell you I've got sets of cans from about 4 different operations. And they did a nice ad during the Super Bowl that kind of pointed that out. Do we know where we're going to store that? Because let me tell you, those guys can crank out 50,000 cans of water in an hour. That's their typical run time. And for us, that would mean St. Louis. So literally in 6 to 8 hours, we could have a tractor trailer load of canned water. Where are you going to put it? Did you think about that? Do we have somebody who's got an empty warehouse that we could borrow for a week? Do we know people who maybe at the tech center who teach how to run a forklift, because we're now going to have to run a forklift? It's that kind of information. Sometimes it's really hard to get your hands around and dig it and put it in a plan. Sometimes you just have to ask, and so we're going to ask. I know I plowed through this, folks. I left you a few minutes. I think we're pretty much done. Anybody have any questions? A lot of what I went over is in this leave behind, so please hang on to that. Any other questions? Does that give you a sense of what you might be asked to do on that bad day? Commissioner?
2 quick things. Number 1, did I understand that we're going to get an hour of college credit? So I want to make sure I get my college credit. I really appreciate everything you've brought, because a lot of us, most of us here sit on Public Works and Safety, and we've plodded through those.
I'm sorry.
You over the past year.
I'll keep apologizing.
I think it's great. This is impressive. I think equally impressive is the energy, and I would even maybe say passion, that I see you bringing to making sure we are ready. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
For everything you've done over all this time to bring us to this point. So it strikes me, Mayor, I'm impressed with, you know, when we have Mr. May here, we always see his enthusiasm for the task that he's doing. And when we have Zach Flanders and Rob Richardson, who are up next, I think we'll see that equal enthusiasm, and I'm really appreciative of that in the staff, so thank you.
It's a key element in my staff. I ask them to be that equal. Nobody does this for the fun or the great big cash payouts. This is because we believe in it.
The instant command process is what we use for the UAW at General Motors, and we also involve the city, the fire department, the police department on a yearly basis. So it works.
It does work, and it is that flexible that it doesn't apply just to response communities. It can apply in private industry and a lot of other places. It really does help. We recently had a quick meeting with the folks at Nordic Foods. They use ammonia like most people do for large refrigeration, and that has its issues. And we were out talking with them, and their first problem was that when the fire department rolled up on scene, they didn't know who to talk to. And when we left, they knew who to talk to. They say incident commander, and they'll get to the right person. Sometimes just having that common terminology makes that interface between public and private work a lot better. And so it is one of the advantages of ICS.
That made me think about BPU and some of the chemicals that we use to treat the water. And so we do have some hazardous chemicals down there. And you guys are you all integrated with their teams to take care of that?
We are. I will say yes with a proviso, which is I may not know exactly how that interface works because that's really a field unit, but I will tell you that the fire department in particular, when you're talking about hazardous materials, that's something they go out and work with almost every public and private entity to make sure that they know what they have on the grounds, which is a responsibility my office gets involved with. We get what we call Tier 2 reports. So if you have certain, a fairly lengthy list of chemicals you have to report, and if you have a above a reportable threshold, you have to tell us that it's there, and then we share that information not only with our own response folks, but with those that might be coming to help us. So we share our information with KCMO, so they don't walk into a scene and say, "Hey, don't they have ethyl methyl whatever in here?" And we need to remember not to put water on that because it reacts badly. Those are things that they need to know, and so we share that regionally, so that you can get a DVD or you can pull it down online and you can see all that information. But absolutely, we would.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have a presentation on the Northeast Master Plan. And again, I'd ask Mr. Bach to open with remarks.
All right, thank you, Mayor. This stems back to a commission directive back to us that goes back a couple of years ago when we started working to put funding forward to go through, study the Northeast area, and put a plan in place. I think it kind of came on the heels of one we had done down and around the KU, the Rosedale area, and we'd looked to the Northeast to say it'd been, well, some years since we'd probably never that we'd done this kind of detailed plan to look into this area. Funding came in place last year, so we started the process, and this is being headed up by our planning department. And I'll turn it over to Rob Richardson and let him kick it off from there.
Thank you. You're right. We have never done a city plan for this entire area. There have been planning efforts that have been done by the Housing Authority, by LISC, by some other folks, but we don't have any adopted master plan from this area outside of the 2008 citywide master plan. In that planning process, we had great participation in the Northeast. Some of our biggest meetings were there. And so we knew the people were very interested in this, but with the level of funding we had in that plan, the plan for most of the urban area was very generic. And so since that time, actually during that time, we did the downtown area master plan, then we've done some work in Rosedale. We are doing work in the Northeast right now, and I believe you have in the budget in the next couple of years to work towards things south of downtown, Central Avenue area, and possibly Armourdale as well. So we'll finish out the eastern portion of the community. But it's important to note that we haven't really done this type of extensive effort for the Northeast before. There's been some confusion about that and a little bit of, we've planned a lot and haven't seen much, but we really haven't done that with a plan that had the force of law with the community once it's adopted as part of our master plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zach Flanders. He's a planner in our office, and he's been leading this project very well, and he's the subject matter expert, so I'm going to let him walk through the PowerPoint with you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rob. And I want to start off by thanking the Commission for making this plan possible and making it a priority. Our plans are very important. I use our plans every day when I'm reviewing development. It gives us the tools to make development better. We use it all the time when working with Public Works and planning for our infrastructure. It makes our grants so much more competitive. A lot of the infrastructure projects that we do require state and federal involvement, and one of the top criteria on all of those grant applications is this in your comprehensive plan, is in your master plan, do you have community support for it? So this is going to make our jobs much easier and gives us the marching orders for the Northeast area that we haven't had in the past. So I'm very excited to be working on this and can't iterate enough how important it is. The goals of the plan are very simply to improve the quality of life for current and future residents, identify opportunities for strategic reinvestment, and put the ideas into action. So I'll talk about the action part in a little bit. And just to give an overview of what is the Northeast area, it's a large area, it's everything north of State Avenue and Washington Boulevard, east of I-635, all the way to the Missouri River, all the way around, including Fairfax. So it's a big area. It's about 20,000 residents and 10,000 employees in this area. Tonight, we're going to review our schedule and where we are with the schedule and with the plan. We'll talk about the results of the first two community meetings and some of the smaller meetings that we've done. We'll talk about early action projects, which is kind of unique to this plan. We've actually set aside about $15,000 to make tangible and we hope long-lasting improvements in the neighborhood right from the start. So that's something that will, people will be able to see improvements happening right away. And as this plan feeds into our budget and ongoing projects going forward, we're hoping that that will spark activity going forward. We'll talk about our draft plan themes. We're to the point where we've identified goals, we've identified a vision, now we've identified 4 major themes, and we're organizing the plan around these 4 major themes. And then we'll talk about our recent meeting results and next steps. So review of schedule, we're approximately halfway through. We started in September, really laying the groundwork for the plan, having some neighborhood meetings, doing a tour of the area, and then in October we had our first public meeting. It was very well attended. We had approximately 80 to 100 people at both of our meetings. We held one during the day and one in the evening. That led to our vision and goals, which we then talked about in our next community meeting, which was held in December, early December, and we're getting ready for our 3rd public meeting in March. We're hoping to wrap the plan up with our 4th meeting in the May-June timeframe, and then have a plan in front of you by July or August to go for adoption. Our initial community engagement, and I want to talk a little bit about what we've done to engage the community. I've been very proud at our effort of engaging the community. We sent postcards to every address in the plan area, close to 10,000 postcards. We also are on Facebook, and we've been paying for Facebook ads, which have been really effective at targeting just the zip codes in this area. We got thousands of engagement clicks with those ads, and I think that went a long ways toward getting people aware of the meetings. We've been using the UG e-News and our newsletter platform. And another thing that we did to just go above and beyond, we received, in our sign-in sheets, we received a lot of people that signed in with a phone number but not an email. And we actually called every single phone number that we received, over 100 phone calls, to make sure people knew that the neighborhood meetings were happening.
And we did that for each of the meetings, and we're doing it again. So they've received 2 postcards already, and they'll receive another one for the upcoming meeting.
Went out in the mail yesterday. And the results of that are, I think, very strong. We've had over 350 unique people come to a meeting. Many people have come to all the meetings or multiple meetings. And that's not including the most recent meeting that we had on Friday, where we had approximately 75 people attend. And I think a lot of those people had been to a previous meeting, but we could be getting close to 400 people that have been engaged with this plan. And I think that's a sign of how important this plan is and how much interest there is in the community for this plan.
Yeah, you'll note that he said on Friday night from 6 to 8, we had 70 to 75 people come to a public meeting.
So it's very important. This is a summary of our first community meeting, where it was a very broad conversation about what are people's values, what do people want to see in the neighborhood from a high-level vision perspective. And you'll see in the circle over there, that's a word cloud where the words that were discussed most often are the largest. So people want a community that is healthy and safe. You'll notice grocery, jobs, streets, sidewalks, historic, store, neighborhood. Those are some important words and concepts that were discussed. And then that might be too small to read on the screen there, but in your handout, we also asked people for more specific ideas. And just to call out a few of those: health and well-being, grocery store and access to healthy food, clean up abandoned houses, locally owned businesses, access to living wage jobs, a safe neighborhood with safe streets and sidewalks, and a good bus system. So those are some of the ideas that were put forward about what quality of life means. At the second community meeting, we got more detailed, and we identified several different types of places in the Northeast, everything from commercial corridors to neighborhoods, different type of commercial corridors, from your 635 commercial area to Quindaro as a commercial area, to more of the downtown area on State and Washington, talking about industrial districts and neighborhood gateways, historic sites, and then parks and parkways. And we had a map for each of these place types and a series of questions. And this was more of an open house format where people went around to different stations and engaged with each one of these place types and told us what they'd like to see in that area. So I put the slide for industrial district in the presentation, but if you're interested in the full results of this neighborhood meeting, you can go to our website, and we have a detailed breakdown of each area. But you can see in Fairfax, people wanted to see a restaurant, job training centers, improved lighting as the top 3, and then close behind there, seeing sidewalks improved and just safe. I think the improved lighting, what was really behind that was safety of the area. And then we asked people also, what is your big idea? And so you can see a series of ideas there. But just to call out a few: jobs, entertainment, recreation, getting young people involved, which we'll talk about in a minute, safe walking and biking trails, connecting with youth via programming in our parks, connecting Jersey Creek, healthy restaurants, healthy food. So you can see a trend emerging from what we've been hearing at these community meetings.
One of the things that's on there is to clean the trees, overgrown weeds, bushes, and alleys, and hopefully sometime over the summer we'll have an idea for some of those projects coming back to you guys.
I think another strong thread is entrepreneurship. So you see co-working space on there. there's a lot of interest in locally owned businesses and entrepreneurship. So that brings us to our plan themes. We're thinking of these as layers that will organize the plan, and then our specific recommendations and projects will fall under these themes. So the first one is a rich history. In every conversation, the history of the area was brought up, and it's pretty amazing to hear the stories. Everything from, you know, the Native Americans who were here, the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Underground Railroad and the history of Quindaro, the history of Fairfax being one of the first industrial planned districts in the area, to the history of the people, the history of Sumner, the first African-American astronaut. There's a lot of history, and we want to make sure that we're celebrating that and recognizing that and really making it a destination and adding some features to the neighborhood that calls out that history. A food hub, we heard a lot about it's a food desert, and there's a need for access to healthy food. And so what can we do to bring healthy food to the neighborhood? We're looking at potential for co-op models for grocery stores. We have a mobile market that is starting up, and in fact, we're changing our ordinance to allow that. Well, I suppose that's on the agenda for Thursday to change the ordinance, so that will be in front of you this week.
March 1st.
March 1st. You know, we have community farms. We have a lot of strong assets in the neighborhood when it comes to food, even in Fairfax, thinking about food industry and how we leverage that. So that's another theme of the plan. A healthy home is the third theme of the plan. This goes to, we have great neighborhoods, we have great houses, great housing stock in the Northeast, but we also have a lot of challenges with abandoned properties, delinquent property taxes, vacant houses, and how do we make sure our neighborhoods are safe and our streets are safe and there are sidewalks, there are safe places for people to go as far as parks, improving our parks, improving our infrastructure so people are safe and people have a safe place to live and a healthy home. And then finally, an expanded economy. Fairfax has a lot of job openings, and they're having trouble finding the people with the skills to fill those jobs. And we also have people who would really benefit from having a job. So how do we bridge that gap? Also looking at, as I mentioned before, entrepreneurship, and how do we as the city support businesses and allow businesses to thrive in the Northeast. So that brings us to our early action projects. Again, I want to emphasize that these are a small part of the plan. We have about $15,000 set aside for this, and the idea is to have some tangible results right away. It's not everything in the plan. We have big projects in the plan, and we're going to have big ideas in the plan, but these are the things that can get the ball rolling on those big ideas. We asked the community for ideas about how this $15,000 could be spent, and at the first community meeting, we had hundreds of ideas submitted. We drafted that up into a shorter list, and then at the second community meeting, had people vote on that list. So here's the results from that list. Far and away, the first priority is doing something about a grocery store. And so we had written bringing in an expert to talk about co-op grocery stores and how that can be a way that we could overcome the burden of finding an operator for the grocery store. Since that time, we've also thought about seeing if we could, we have a potential space identified that we could clean out and make ready for occupation and potentially use that as a community space where we have a speaker series about how to do a co-op grocery store or other models for grocery stores. Or we could team with the people that are doing the mobile market and try to make that a hub for groceries on more of a trial basis or more of a farmer's market idea. So we've had some pretty exciting meetings where some ideas have been coalescing around that. So within the next few weeks, we'll be chasing down a few of those ideas and be presenting more about that on the March 13th community meeting. The second most voted on early action project was a health clinic, and we've made a lot of progress on that. We have a few places in the neighborhood that are identified as could potentially house a health clinic, and we have an operator interested in coming to the area. So we're hoping to have a substantial update on that as well at the community meeting. And then finally, Youth Build. Well, I guess Youth Build was number 2 and the health clinic was number 3. So working with Youth Build to rehab a model block, we're working with some of our contacts to see what that could look like, and are working towards using Youth Build and supporting that organization and how we can clean up in a targeted way.
And we might even use that with some of our land bank properties in the land bank process that we've got going. So we're trying to put those other things that we've been working on as part of the SOAR initiative to work through this process to show them that it can work for their neighborhood.
So those are 3 tangible things that we think can come out of the gate right away from this plan, and that will set the stage for the larger projects and ideas and initiatives that will be in the full plan. I guess I kind of talked about these before flipping to the slide, but we're wanting to bring in an expert that can establish and maintain a grocery co-op, or teach us how to do that, and bring some tangible either farmer's market or pop-up grocery store to the northeast area.
Zach, I have a question on this. So,
yeah.
In the discussions with the community, you know, there are ways to solve the food desert problem, and certainly one would be, you know, hiring an operator, the standard operator, but to identify a community-owned co-op as the preferred method. In the conversations the community had, what was it about the community ownership? I mean, I have my thoughts about why that would be, but from what you gathered, what was it about a community-owned co-op that is most attractive, or makes it the preferred, what seems to be the preferred method? Was it simply because we could not find an operator to do it, and this is the only method?
I don't know if the co-op idea is central to establishing a grocery store and access to healthy food. We would be open to a traditional operator coming in, obviously.
We had a meeting on this afternoon, and I would just say that, you know, we looked at a space that we have that might be available that could be easily rehabbed, working with some community members that are interested in this topic, and, you know, that we don't have an operator, and so it might be that whoever raises their hand first, if it's a traditional operator or a co-op system that comes forward, I mean, we're less interested probably in the operation style than we are getting something up and going, but we also think there'd be some tremendous benefits to having it be community owned and co-op for the community. So there are some, our interest is getting something going quickly and sustainably versus the method of operation.
Okay, so that's, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, but I mean, there are some obvious advantages to have a community-owned co-op. There's that sense of being a stakeholder in your community that an outside operator would not bring. And so I just wondered if that was part of the discussion. That was what people...
We had that exact discussion,
yeah,
about an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago.
I guess what I'm asking is, in the conversations with the community, got the input from the community, did they identify reasons why the community-owned co-op would be preferable, or was this just simply first person to raise their hands we're going to go with?
I don't know that there was any specific, we want it to be cooperative. We wanted a grocery store, and so we looked at the range of possibilities and identified that as one of the range.
Mayor, there was some discussion about a co-op before we actually got this thing off the ground. So there was this idea that had life before we got to the table, and we've allowed those voices to be heard, and they're coming forward now. So this is something that predated the Northeast Master Plan, and so there were some efforts, at least dialogues, that were happening in the community, and I think we're bringing a lot of those players together right now. Not to say one versus the other, it's just the fact that I think that the community is saying this is something we can coalesce around in terms of the sustainability and viability of a grocery store in the urban core.
So that's very helpful, because the way we are presenting this, it seems to me that the preference is for, as it says, a community-owned co-op. So this predates the Northeast Master Plan process, but what I'm also hearing is from staff is that, but we're not concerned so much about the methodology. So that's what I'm trying to identify. Is this really the preference of the community to have a community-owned co-op, or just anybody who would actually make a
I wouldn't say
success
that
of it?
there's necessarily a preference, but I would say that this is something that we've heard consistently as we were putting this together. And so I think with the fact that we have players, we have persons that have interest right now, as opposed to trying to find an operator, which we don't have right now. The fact that we have some persons that are ready to come around the table right now that have already been meeting, we're looking at every opportunity, but this one is kind of first out of the chute, so to speak, and they've been already having discussions, and so we're trying to enhance that dialogue, I think. I think if an operator shows up at our door, then we win twice. So,
thank you.
I think the other thing about the co-op is that you still have to find somebody to lead that co-op effort, and that person has not been identified yet, and that's where I think I get the sentiment of whoever raises their hand first, because you still, even if it's cooperative, you have to have somebody that manages that and organizes that and takes that on as their project, and that person hasn't been identified, but there are people that might be that person, but it's not a fully completed idea yet.
But because ultimately it's going to come down to if whoever can bring a plan that shows the most promise of success is who we're going to go with. Because again, open a grocery store, help it get going, and then not have it succeed is even worse.
You're doing a very nice summary of the meeting we had this afternoon, because all those topics were, you know, we talked about all those, whether we started as a pop-up to say this is what we could do, and we do that for a couple of months, and then we go out and try and find people to take on the idea of the co-op, or to get the more traditional user to come in and provide the service, or whether we start it and we do it at, you know, 3,000 to 6,000 square feet and then expand it a few months later. You know, there's a whole range of opportunities on the table for that particular location. And, you know, that location may or may not be the location. Some people say if you're going to do a co-op, you need to spend a year and a half working on the co-op side before you even think about location. So I mean, there's a very broad discussion that goes into this, and HNMA is deeply involved in this, as well as the master plan and a lot of members of the community.
Yes, Commissioner McKiernan.
So has this, through DOT agency and all this coalition of people, has this mobile market that's going to begin operating imminently entered the discussion at all? You're talking about pop-ups. I mean, they are effectively going to create a mobile pop-up.
Right.
That
Matt Kleiman was on the phone with us today. He was on the part of the meeting.
So they are part of that discussion.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, I think to be clear, what I've heard at the neighborhood meetings is that the most important priority is a grocery store. And this was something that already had legs, already had energy behind it, and seemed like a strategy that had a lot of benefits, and that's why we've included it this way, but it could very well be a different model. And so this is the location that we've been discussing with the folks who are doing the mobile market and other community members who have been working on this for a long time. So the health clinic, we also met with a potential provider today and looking at possible locations. They're interested in coming to KCK, and they seem like they have the funding and the experience to do it, and we're looking at locations where they could go. We've also applied for a grant for the Quintero Ruins or Quintero Town Site, the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. We applied for $150,000 with Western University being the applicant as a 501c3. And this would go towards a feasibility study that they've already identified as a need and have already priced out at $150,000 to make this more of a destination and possibly tie it to improvements to that site. And then we're tracking a few other grants that.
I hate to go backwards just 2 slides, but that health clinic, is this a fee-for-service clinic? Is it a safety net clinic? In broad brush strokes, what are we thinking?
Well, the conversation I've had is they're primarily interested in serving Medicare and Medicaid patients.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. This is not an area that I'm an expert in, so I would defer to our consultant or somebody who is an expert about health.
And I would also say that, you know, when we went to school to become planners, working on where to locate a health clinic wasn't in any of our classes. We learned about land use and transportation and parks and topography and zoning and how to do site plans, and the community planning process has really evolved. And so we're taking the neighborhood ideas, and we're, with help of the consultants and HMA and other community members, we're just running with these things. And you know, the grants that are being applied for, some of them, I don't know that any of them are actually by the city. I think that if you go to the next slide, the next one there, the Neighborhood Rising Fund, I think that HMA's working on that one. I'm not sure who's working on the enterprise, but this is something that we're working with them to show them where they are. If they don't know, HMA is very skilled at this, by the way, already, so they know a lot of these things, and they're helping us be successful in part of this. But we have, we're trying to have the community apply for these so that it's part of a community-based process and helping the community build the capacity to work on these projects on their own in the future beyond HMA. So, I mean, HMA is a great organizing part, but working with Western University and the others and showing that there's some of our, we're willing to put some of our effort behind it, I think is a way to help build the community for the long term.
I have a question about the Quindaro Town Site reinvestment. Who's driving the plan for what to do with that site? I mean, how is that proceeding, and is there real consensus, and where is that consensus coming from?
So this grant was with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It was required that the landowner, the person who controls the land, be the applicant, and that they be a 501c3. So Western University, Pastor Stacy Evans, was the applicant on this project.
And I don't know that we're to the point where we have consensus about what would be built, where you would put a walking path, or if you know, I don't think that we're to that point yet.
So the application did not require a specific, you know, shovel-ready plans. This is more
of the base level study process.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the grant could have been used for even, you know, staff salary. We submitted it with the idea that we would do a feasibility study to explore those topics. So it's a pretty broad.
And so this is going to allow us to bring that consensus about.
Correct.
Okay.
So since the 2 large community meetings, we've had several smaller meetings. We had a steering committee meeting that brought together people from within the UG and other organizations, and in a smaller group. That's where we got feedback on the plan themes and discussed the early action projects. We've hired 2 community liaisons, Karen French and Pastor Stevie Wakes. They've been very instrumental in helping us with this plan. They've been fantastic. They've been bringing ideas to the table. I can't emphasize how beneficial this has been to bring on these community liaisons.
I would just note on that, so part of the budget we had for involving the community and building the community was used to hire the 2 community liaisons. The other part is for the early action projects. So if you go back to how we discussed that in the budget process, that's where those funds went to.
And so with this group, we worked through these 4 themes, and we came up with these ideas under each theme. So under rich history, Quindaro reinvestment for the Quindaro home site or the Quindaro ruins, vacant building reuse, and then Fairfax district branding. For a food hub, we talked about a restaurant incubator, again, the grocery store, and then utilizing community farms for that access to healthy foods. A Healthy Home talked about expanding the land bank rehab program, expanded daycare at community facilities, and home repair program as being top priorities. And then an expanded economy talked about focusing on retail nodes at key intersections, Fairfax job training program for residents, and then although Indian Springs is a little bit outside of our defined plan district, it was something that was brought up in all the community meetings, and we thought we'd be remiss if we didn't include it as one of the priorities in the plan. We also went to the Wyandotte Economic Development Council, and I guess you can read the summary of feedback here, but community involvement and cooperation are important for addressing safety and security. Employment opportunities could be provided through light industrial expansion. We got feedback that is a high demand land use, that there is need to expand light industrial space. Partnering with local NPOs to provide workforce training, a subsidy program that will improve the lack of local food services, improve services for safety, to attract residents with disposable income, and then engage developers to address barriers to local investment. So this is feedback that we got from our business community.
Zach?
Yes.
Listen, when you use acronyms like NPOs or something, a lot of people don't understand what you're talking about, so
yeah,
try to put in the John Q. Public comment with that. Okay.
Is that, I'm not actually sure what, is that neighborhood plan?
Not-for-profit organizations.
Okay.
Basically all
So
of us.
our consultant was supposed to be here with us tonight, and this is their presentation, but their flights were all canceled out of Chicago today, so we picked up the ball and ran with it, so sorry about that one.
Basically, Zach, we're all not-for-profits here.
Okay. So then the Unity with a Purpose meeting, this was last Friday. I was very energized by this meeting. This was a meeting that we were invited to, a group that's been meeting, and they invited us to talk about the neighborhood, or the Northeast Area Master Plan. We had 6 breakout groups that talked about housing and neighborhoods, crime and safety, culture, education, recreation and entertainment, economy and opportunity, and healthy food. We're still kind of digesting the results of that meeting and typing up notes. But I was very energized by that meeting. I thought it was a really positive neighborhood meeting.
I led the discussion on crime and safety. It was a very lively discussion. I was told on numerous occasions, you don't even want me to start, and I said, I'm here for a couple hours. You might as well let me write it down. So they opened up and let us have it in some ways, and let us know where we were doing all right in some ways too. So it was a very vibrant discussion, and there were several people in each group, and I think they kind of went to the area that they were most interested in and gave us some pretty good feedback. And then we had community members report out for their groups at the end. It was very nice.
We were scheduled to meet with entrepreneurship class in Wyandotte High School today, but obviously with the weather, they canceled classes. And so we're working on rescheduling a meeting with high school students, because we haven't had the best engagement with youth in our public meetings so far. And so we wanted to do some targeted engagement and try to get high school students' perspective. And then we're also meeting with, at El Centro with Latino residents. We're scheduling an additional youth meeting and trying to reschedule our original one. We have our community meeting number 3 on Tuesday, March 13th. That's going to be at Bertram Carruthers Elementary School at 11th and Waverly. We're having 2 meetings again, one at noon and one at 6:00 p.m. And then what we're doing now is we're taking those themes and we're developing what are our transportation, infrastructure, and development and land use strategies, and really going area by area, block by block, and applying these to a land use map and to an infrastructure strategy map. There's more information about the next community meeting. And then that's our website address. If you want to learn more, there's detailed breakdowns of the first 2 community meetings and additional information. I'd really encourage you to go there and check out all the documents that we have there.
Yes.
I was just going to comment on the question of, or the issue of getting youth involved. So my husband grew up in Belton, and he still remembers that when they were in high school, they did a survey of high school aged youth asking them what would get them to stay in Belton. Now, clearly he moved here, but, you know, we were already in a relationship at that point, so he had no choice. But he still remembers that, and when we go back to Belton, he'll point things out and say, you know, we told them we wanted parks, and they made this park bigger, and they put this park over here, and we told them we wanted this, and look, now Belton has that. And so he remembers that, and he feels like they saw results from that. And one thing that we notice in Wyandotte County often is that our young people go out to college, and we have a difficulty getting them to come back. So I think it's definitely worth engaging that population. You know, we tend to focus on surveying our taxpayers, but if we want our young people to come back and stay here, we need to know what's important to them and what would make them come back rather than going to live somewhere else. So I think it's good that you're trying to get that engagement from that part of our community.
Commissioner McKiernan.
This is excellent work. It's uniformly excellent work, and I really look forward to engaging in the Central Avenue area in this same kind of master planning process. But it strikes me that if we divorce place names from this, if we really take away references to place, what I feel comes out of this are themes that I think would exist in every urban neighborhood. And I think we would do really well to pull out those common themes of safety, of lighting, of need for services, of neighborhoods, and we would really do well to pull those out. And while we might apply them to this master plan in this area, we think about how we capitalize or how we address those themes of needs, of challenges, of opportunities across the entirety of our city and county. And I think we would do well to do that, because these are themes that I hear in the neighborhoods of my district. And so I think some of them are fairly universal that we would do well to pay attention to.
And I think that's an excellent point, and also Commissioner Markley's point. It's really about bringing services to neighborhoods, to neighbors in neighborhoods, because, and I reflect upon my own experience where I live. You know, for many decades, you can see that there were not improvements being made to the roads. There was not improvements being made to retail nearby. And in fact, when Merriam Town Center opened, that was actually an improvement for my neighborhood. Even though it's on the other side of the county line, the fact is now I did not have to drive all the way out to 95th Street to get building materials. It was close by at the Home Depot. Would have preferred it in Wyandotte County. It didn't happen, but nevertheless, it helped tie me to my neighborhood. So I think we have to keep coming back to the fact that we live in our neighborhoods, and how we experience our neighborhoods is what ties us in. And in Wyandotte County, we have a very special heritage of attachment and identity with our neighborhoods. And as we bring more energy and resources to those solving neighborhood problems, those neighborhoods will grow. And in fact, property values will grow, which will grow our fiscal resiliency. So I think this is really on the right track, and we're really focusing on these neighborhoods as we're doing in other areas, and so I think it's the right approach and very well done. Yes?
So now I'm going to step back from the themes and go back to this plan. I think one of our big challenges is now ahead of us is to make sure that we can find ways to execute some of the specifics that have been articulated in this plan, so that it doesn't end up, as I have heard reported to me, like so many of our other plans before. We have a nice plan, it has a nice place on the shelf, and so our big challenge now is how to execute some of the specifics, going back to the place names and going back to the specific neighborhood issues, how we address those and make those happen.
I'm so glad you asked that. You might be aware that we've purchased the Invisio software to work on the SOAR goals and the commission goals. We're putting all of the former adopted master plan goals into Invisio so that we can track those and work on those, and these goals will go into Invisio as well. So we will be tracking them. We will get updates. We will know, as part of each of those implementation measures, we'll say, this is what we are trying to do. This is who's responsible. This is how much it's going to cost, and this is the time frame to get it done. And so we can use that with CMIP planning, working with neighborhood groups and the NBRs to make sure that all those things happen. And that's a tool that we haven't had before. And you'll remember that you authorized the position that Zach now holds in a budget a year or two ago, and that was for primarily for long-range planning, so that we could do a better job of implementing those resources that we have. And so we are full steam ahead making use of that.
Yes, Commissioner.
I just have a few comments. The things that were said in this plan, to Commissioner McKiernan's point, basically I've heard the constituents say, look, we just want what every other vibrant community wants. And so these things, it's not surprising that these things have kind of bubbled to the top because they're just saying we want to be safe like every other community. We want to be healthy just like every other community. I would say because of the fact that this area of town has been divested in for so long for many reasons, and before I go that far, I do want to thank Rob and Zach for the work that you all have done, because they've put a real pretty face on some real tough conversations, and they have taken it like champs. We all have, and some of the comments that we've heard, we've earned, just to be frank with you. But so I want to implore, thank you all for the work that you all are doing. But I do want to implore this commission to look long terms in terms of the resources necessary to ensure its sustainability. When we look at what's going on out west, that didn't happen overnight. That's been a process of many, many years, decades, if not. And so now we see, as some of the older, the seasoned elders would say, the West is kind of creating its own juices, so to speak. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time before we see that happen in Northeast, but I think we need to make sure that we think long terms in terms of the necessary resources to ensure its sustainability, not just throwing money to say we're throwing money at something, but as we're looking at CMIP, as we're looking at the SOAR program, let's be very specific about what we're putting into Northeast, because I think that that is going to all be part of how we're moving this thing forward, so that we're looking at smart ways to use money, smart strategic ways of using money and our resources, so that we can get the biggest bang for our buck, whether we're looking at a particular node or some of these preferred specific projects that have come out of that. I just want to make sure that we don't just see this as something that we have done, and Rob and I have had many conversations about this already. Once July is done, then what happens? You know, we want to make sure that this is sustainable into the future. I'm going to be an old man, and as many gray hairs as I have right now, I'm probably going to be fully gray before we see the manifestation of all of this. So somebody said, be careful.
Well, Commissioner, it only took about 18 years for things to kind of bubble up out west. So, hey, you know, you might be totally gray.
Commissioner Townsend, did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me? Hello?
Maybe perhaps we lost Commissioner Townsend.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
I will get with her and get her comments, or Zach will. We'll make sure we make contact with her tomorrow or later this week.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. That concludes our meeting for the evening. Is there someone else who has?
Nothing. I love what they did. I just have another, I didn't mention anything about parks. I didn't mention anything about budgets. But in our last budget, we announced that we're going to build a fire station and a park behind that, and I'd like to have a presentation on that in the next couple of weeks of where we're at with that, because we have a new mayor and a new commissioner. I think we need to all be brought up to date.
Very good. We're adjourned. I'm sorry. Technology.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Go ahead.
Good
listening. I have been on all along, even with Mr. May's presentation. So if he's listening, I want to commend him for his presentation, and I'll get with him on a separate question about how his presentation and plan, heaven forbid we ever have a situation like Parkland, Florida, may be employed. But to the immediate presentation with the Northeast Master Plan, I want to again thank this commission and the former administration for supporting the money needed to have this done, first of all. And it just shows having so many people at the table that there are so many good ideas about what has been needed, as Commissioner Johnson said, in an area that has appeared to some to have been neglected for so long. This is going to give us a blueprint, and I'd like Mr. Flanders' brief summation of the top 3 reasons for this plan. I hope it will result in action. So I'd like to thank Mr. Richardson, Mr. Flanders, all of the community partners, and the consultants, and all of the people who are going to benefit from this, the citizens of the area that's been designated in Wyandotte County, for participating thus far. I've told the consultants, I hope that out of this we will be able to identify people who want to come into this area and do development that is in concert with the preferences expressed by the members of this area. So I'd like to thank them. The other thing that I wanted to say is, just so that I'm clear, I was listening to the mayor's questions about the co-op and the grocery store. The co-op situation came about as one of the most immediate things that might be approached. But I don't think anyone who's participated in any of these sessions, or this community at large, the Northeast community, would see this as a way to forego a more traditional operator. I certainly don't. But if we can, with more immediacy, service the community with a long-term pop-up store or a co-op in the area and at the location identified, that's great. But that's not necessarily in lieu of a long-term brick-and-mortar operator, just so I'm clear. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Wonderful. We're adjourned until our 7 o'clock meeting downstairs in the chambers.